A piercing wail echoed through the craggy hills outside of Alamosa, Colorado, in the spring of 1883. But only the ancient stone walls of the cave heard Tabitha King's desperate prayers as she fought through another contraction. Her trembling hands pressed against the cool rock as she tried to breathe through the searing pain that had begun hours earlier on her desperate journey to find help. The gold mining settlement of Alamosa lay 15 miles south, and her husband's grave lay somewhere in the hills behind her. Joseph had been dead 3 weeks now, shot by claim jumpers who'd left Tabitha alone and 7 months pregnant on their small homestead. The baby wasn't supposed to come for another 6 weeks, but grief and hardship had other plans. "Please," she gasped to no one, her voice ragged. "Please not here. Not like this." Another contraction ripped through her, and this time her cry echoed out of the cave mouth and into the vast Colorado wilderness. Clayton Young heard it as he rode past on his dappled gray stallion. At 28, he'd seen and heard many things during his years as a trail guide and sometimes deputy, but a woman's scream from a hillside cave wasn't among them. He reined in his horse sharply, listening as the sound came again. "Whoa, storm cloud," he murmured, patting the horse's neck. The animal's ears were pricked forward toward the rocky outcropping ahead. "You heard it too, didn't you, boy?" Clayton dismounted, tethered Stormcloud to a scrubby pine, and drew his Colt revolver from its holster. Mountain lions weren't uncommon in these parts, and neither were desperate outlaws looking for shelter. But something in that cry sounded distinctly human and in terrible distress. He climbed the rocky slope carefully, boot heels finding purchase on the loose shale. The cave opening was partially hidden behind a stand of juniper, but as he approached, he clearly heard a woman's voice, ragged with pain. Inside the cave, Tabitha had collapsed onto her side, her threadbare dress soaked with sweat. The small bundle of provisions she'd packed lay scattered nearby a canteen, some hardtack, a small knife, and her husband's old shirt that she couldn't bear to leave behind. She'd been heading to her sister's home in Santa Fe when the pain started, forcing her to seek shelter. "Hello." Clayton's deep voice called from the entrance. "Anyone in need of help?" Tabitha's eyes flew open. "Here," she managed to call back, though her voice was weak. "Please help me." Clayton holstered his gun and hurried into the cave, stopping short at the sight before him. A young woman, clearly in labor, lay curled on the stone floor, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion. "Sweet mercy," he breathed, dropping to one knee beside her. "Madam, I'm Clayton Young from Alamosa. What in heaven's name are you doing out here alone?" "Tabitha," she gasped. "Tabitha King." Her words cut off as another contraction seized her, and she cried out, clutching at his arm with surprising strength. "The baby's coming," she said when she could speak again. "Too early. I can't stop it." Clayton had helped deliver foals and calves, but never a human child. Still, wilderness living had taught him that hesitation could be deadly. "All right, Mrs. King. I'm going to help you," he said with more confidence than he felt. "First, let me get you more comfortable." He quickly shed his leather vest and folded it into a makeshift pillow. With gentle hands, he helped Tabitha into a better position, then shrugged off his coat and laid it over her for warmth. The spring air still carried winter's bite, especially in the hills. "How long have you been in labor?" he asked, running back to the cave entrance to retrieve his canteen. "Since dawn," she whispered. Her auburn hair was plastered to her forehead and her green eyes were glazed with pain. "My husband is dead, claim jumpers. I was trying to reach my sister." Clayton's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry, Mrs. King. No woman should face this alone." He held the canteen to her lips. Small sips now. As she drank, he assessed their situation. Night would fall soon and the temperature with it. The cave offered shelter, but they needed more than that. "I need to gather some things," he said. Wood for a fire, my bedroll from my horse. Will you be all right for a few minutes? Tabitha nodded weakly. Been alone this far, she murmured. Not anymore, Clayton promised. I'll be quick. He raced down the slope, gathered his saddlebags and bedroll, and collected dead branches for a fire. Within 10 minutes, he was back at her side, laying out his supplies. You're not what I expected, Tabitha said between labored breaths. When I heard you, I thought maybe it was the men who killed Joseph, come back to finish me too. Those men won't hurt you again if I have anything to say about it, Clayton said firmly, striking a match to the kindling he'd arranged. The small flame took hold, casting a warm glow over the cave walls. Let me tell you, Mrs. King, you're about the bravest woman I've ever encountered. Tabitha, she insisted, and I'm not brave, I'm terrified. Doing what needs doing despite being afraid, that's the very definition of courage. He spread his bedroll beside her and helped her onto the softer surface. Now, I've delivered my share of foals and calves, but I'll admit this is different territory. Can you tell me how far along you think you are? Before she could answer, another contraction seized her. This one was stronger than before, and Tabitha couldn't hold back her cry of pain. I think, she panted when it passed, I think it's very close. I can feel the pressure. Clayton's heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his expression calm. All right then. I'll need to check if that's acceptable to you. I promise to be respectful. Tabitha nodded, past the point of modesty. Please, help my baby. With gentle hands and averted eyes as much as possible, Clayton confirmed what Tabitha already knew: the baby was coming, and soon. He arranged his saddlebags to give her something to brace against and positioned himself to help. On the next pane, I need you to push, he instructed. I'll count for you. 1, 2, 3. Tabitha bore down with all her remaining strength, her face contorted with effort. Clayton counted steadily, his voice an anchor in her storm of pain. When the contraction ended, she collapsed back, gasping. You're doing wonderfully, Clayton encouraged. I can see the baby's head, dark hair just like yours. Joseph had dark hair too, Tabitha whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. He was so happy about the baby. He'd be mighty proud of how strong you're being, Clayton said, his voice thick with emotion for this woman he'd just met but already admired tremendously. The next contraction came quickly, and this time Clayton could see the baby's head emerging more fully. Push, Tabitha, that's it. With a guttural cry that echoed off the cave walls, Tabitha gave a final heroic push. Clayton's hands were there, ready and steady as the tiny body slipped into the world. A moment of terrifying silence followed, then a thin, outraged cry filled the cave. A boy, Clayton announced, his voice breaking. You have a son, Tabitha. He quickly wiped the baby's face with his cleanest bandana, then wrapped him in his spare shirt before placing him in Tabitha's trembling arms. The infant's cries softened as he felt his mother's warmth. Hello, little one, Tabitha whispered, pressing her lips to her son's forehead. You're early, but you're perfect. Clayton busied himself with the remaining necessities of childbirth, using his hunting knife to cut the cord when appropriate, and making sure Tabitha was as comfortable as possible. By the time he was finished, the fire was crackling cheerfully, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls, and Tabitha was gazing down at her son with exhausted wonder. Thank you, she said, looking up at Clayton with eyes bright with tears. If you hadn't come along. But I did, he said gently. And now we need to get you both somewhere safer than this cave. Once you've rested a bit, we'll head to Alamosa. I know the doctor there. He's a good man. I have nothing to pay him with, Tabitha admitted. Everything was at our homestead and I couldn't go back after. Don't worry about that now, Clayton assured her. First, we get you and this little fella safe and warm. What will you call him? Tabitha looked down at her son's tiny face. Joseph, after his father, she said. Joseph Clayton King. Clayton's head jerked up in surprise. You don't have to do that, madam. I want to, she said simply. You saved his life, both our lives. As the night deepened around them, Clayton prepared a simple meal from his provisions, jerky softened in hot water, hardtack, and coffee. Tabitha ate gratefully, keeping little Joseph close to her heart. Were you heading somewhere specific? She asked as Clayton fed the fire. Before you heard me, I mean. Back to Alamosa, he replied. I was scouting a new trail for a cattle drive coming through next month. He hesitated, then added, I work as a guide mostly, sometimes as a deputy when Sheriff Miller needs an extra hand. You're good at it, Tabitha said. Being there when needed. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional soft sounds from the newborn. Clayton found himself studying Tabitha's face in the firelight, the delicate curve of her cheek, the strength in her jaw despite her exhaustion. He'd never seen anyone endure what she had with such grace. You should rest, he said finally. Tomorrow will be a long day. Tabitha nodded, already struggling to keep her eyes open. Will you stay close? She asked, and the vulnerability in her voice tugged at something deep in Clayton's chest. I'll be right here, he promised. No harm will come to either of you on my watch. As Tabitha drifted into an exhausted sleep with her son cradled against her, Clayton settled himself at the cave entrance, his rifle across his knees. The night was clear, stars scattered across the Colorado sky like diamonds on velvet. He found himself wondering about the claim jumpers who had murdered Tabitha's husband, anger burning slow and steady in his gut. Morning came with golden light spilling into the cave. Clayton had dozed only fitfully, alert to every sound both inside and outside their shelter. Tabitha awoke to find him brewing fresh coffee over the rekindled fire. How are you feeling? He asked, pouring a cup for her. Sore, she admitted. Weak, but alive thanks to you. She looked down at Joseph, who was nursing contentedly. He seemed strong despite coming early. He's his mother's son, Clayton said with a smile. Tough as they come. They shared a simple breakfast before Clayton helped Tabitha to her feet. She was unsteady but determined, and when he offered his arm, she took it without hesitation. I'll need to ride behind you on Stormcloud, Clayton explained. He's steady, but I want to make sure you and Joseph are secure. Tabitha nodded. I trust you. Those 3 simple words affected Clayton more deeply than he expected. He gathered their few belongings, extinguished the fire, and helped Tabitha carefully down the slope to where his horse waited patiently. Getting her mounted was a delicate operation. Clayton fashioned a sling for the baby from his bandana, securing the infant against Tabitha's chest. Then he lifted her onto Stormcloud's back with gentle hands, acutely aware of her winces of pain. I'm sorry, he murmured. We'll go slow. He mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he took the reins with his free hand. Tabitha leaned back against his chest, too exhausted to worry about propriety. Ready? He asked, his breath warm against her ear. Yes, she whispered. They set off at a walk, the horse picking its way carefully down the trail. Clayton kept them to the easiest paths, avoiding rough terrain that might jostle his precious cargo. Tabitha was silent for much of the journey, conserving her strength, but occasionally she would point out a wildflower or comment on the beauty of the landscape. I love these mountains, she said as they descended into a small valley. Joseph and I came west because we wanted open sky and freedom. We had so many plans. What kind of plans? Clayton asked, genuinely interested. A horse farm, she replied. Joseph was good with horses. We saved for 2 years in Philadelphia before coming out here, bought our claim fair and square, started building. Then those men came. Her voice trailed off. You know who they were. One called the others Blackwell and Doyle. The third man, I never heard his name. They wanted our water rights. Said the creek on our property would be worth a fortune when the railroad came through. Joseph refused to sell. Clayton frowned. Blackwell is bad news. Him and his boys have been causing trouble all over the county. Sheriff's been trying to pin something on them for months. They killed my husband in cold blood, Tabitha said, her voice hardening. I hid in the root cellar. They thought the place was empty except for Joseph. Clayton's arm tightened protectively around her waist. When we get to Alamosa, we'll tell Sheriff Miller everything. Those men will answer for what they did. As the sun climbed higher, the heat increased, and Clayton called for a rest beside a small stream. He helped Tabitha down and made sure she was comfortable in the shade of a cottonwood tree before watering Stormcloud. We're making good time, he told her, offering the canteen. Another few hours and we'll be in Alamosa. Tabitha drank gratefully, then attended to little Joseph, who had begun to fuss. Clayton respectfully moved away to give her privacy as she nursed the baby. What will you do in Alamosa? He asked when he rejoined her. I don't know, Tabitha admitted. I can't go back to the homestead alone, not with Blackwell and his men still out there. I was heading to my sister in Santa Fe, but now with Joseph coming early. She looked down at her son, her expression troubled. You could stay in Alamosa until you're stronger, Clayton suggested. Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house is a kind woman. She'd make room for you and the little one. With what money? Tabitha asked with a sad smile. Everything we had was invested in the homestead. Clayton hesitated, then said, I have some savings, not much, but enough to see you settled for a while. Tabitha's head jerked up, her eyes wide with surprise. I couldn't accept that. You've done too much already. Consider it a loan then, he said, to be repaid whenever you're able. Before she could respond, a sound made Clayton stiffen. He motioned for Tabitha to stay quiet, his hand moving to his gun. What is it? She whispered, clutching Joseph tighter. Riders, Clayton murmured. 3 of them coming fast. He peered through the trees. Get behind that boulder, stay down and keep Joseph quiet if you can. Tabitha obeyed without question, her heart pounding as she huddled behind the large rock, murmuring softly to her son to keep him calm. Clayton positioned himself where he could see the trail while remaining partially concealed by the cottonwood. When the riders came into view, his jaw tightened. Blackwell was unmistakable with his bushy red beard and the scar that bisected his left eyebrow. Beside him rode a lean, hawk-faced man Clayton assumed was Doyle, and a third, younger man with a perpetual sneer. Young, Blackwell called out, reining in his horse. Fancy meeting you out here. Clayton kept his expression neutral. Blackwell, you boys are a long way from town. Following up on some business opportunities, Blackwell replied with a grin that didn't reach his cold eyes. Say, you haven't seen a woman on the trail, have you? Dark hair, traveling alone. She's, a relative of mine. Ran off in a state of confusion after her husband passed. Clayton felt a surge of rage but kept it from his face. Can't say that I have. Been tracking a mountain lion that's been taking calves from the Henderson place. Blackwell exchanged glances with his companions. Shame. If you do spot her, you let me know. Woman's not right in the head. Grief, you understand, needs looking after. I'll keep an eye out, Clayton said evenly. Appreciate it. Blackwell tipped his hat. We'll be moving on. Places to go, people to see. He leaned forward in his saddle. You ever reconsider my offer to join our operation? The door's open. Man with your skills could make real money with us. I'm doing fine as I am, thanks, Clayton replied coolly. Blackwell shrugged. Suit yourself. Come on, boys. He spurred his horse, and the 3 men galloped away down the trail toward the hills where Clayton had found Tabitha. When they were out of sight, Clayton hurried to Tabitha's hiding place. She was pale but composed, her arms tight around Joseph. "Was that them?" Clayton asked quietly. She nodded. "Blackwell and Doyle. The younger one I don't recognize." "They're looking for you," Clayton said grimly. "Spinning some tale about you being confused with grief. We need to get to Alamosa quick and talk to Sheriff Miller." "They'll kill me," Tabitha whispered. "They can't let me testify about what they did to Joseph." "I won't let that happen," Clayton said with such fierce conviction that Tabitha believed him. He helped her to her feet. "Let's go. We'll stick to the forest trails. It'll be slower, but they won't expect that." They mounted again, Clayton more alert than ever as they wove through the trees. Tabitha could feel the tension in his body as he held her, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "Why does Blackwell want you to join him?" she asked after a while, hoping conversation might ease the knot of fear in her chest. Clayton sighed. "I used to ride with a rough crowd when I was younger, got in some trouble in Kansas. Sheriff Miller gave me a chance to straighten out when I came to Colorado 5 years back. Blackwell thinks that makes me corruptible. But you're not," Tabitha said with certainty. "Not anymore," Clayton agreed. "Found out the hard way that there's no freedom in living outside the law, just a different kind of prison." They rode in companionable silence for another hour. The baby slept peacefully against Tabitha's chest, and despite their dangerous situation, she found herself drawing comfort from Clayton's steady presence. "Tell me about Philadelphia," he said eventually. "I've never been east of the Mississippi." Tabitha smiled, grateful for the distraction. "It's nothing like this. Buildings everywhere, people crowded together, noise all the time, but there's a certain energy to it. My father was a bookbinder. I grew up surrounded by stories." "That explains it," Clayton said. "Explains what?" "The way you speak. It's educated, pretty." Tabitha felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Joseph used to tease me about my fancy words, as he called them. He was a blacksmith's apprentice when we met. Strong hands, kind eyes." Her voice wavered. "I miss him." "Of course you do," Clayton said gently. "He sounds like a good man." He was. "The best." She touched her son's cheek. "At least I have a part of him with me always." By mid-afternoon, they reached the outskirts of Alamosa. The small mining town sprawled along the banks of the Rio Grande, its main street bustling with the usual mix of merchants, miners, and ranchers. Clayton guided Stormcloud down a side street, avoiding the busier thoroughfares. "We'll go straight to Doc Parker's place," he decided. "Get you and the little one checked over before we talk to the sheriff." Doc Parker's house stood at the end of Maple Street, a neat white building with a red cross painted on the door. Clayton helped Tabitha dismount, supporting her weight as her legs threatened to buckle. "Easy now," he murmured. "You've been through the ringer." The doctor, a balding man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, opened the door at Clayton's knock. His eyebrows shot up at the sight of them. "Clayton Young, what have you gotten yourself into now?" he asked. Then his gaze fell on Tabitha and the bundle in her arms. "Good heavens, bring her in at once." Inside, Doc Parker quickly took charge, leading Tabitha to an examination room while Clayton waited anxiously in the parlor. He paced back and forth, his thoughts tumbling over one another. He needed to find Sheriff Miller, but he couldn't bring himself to leave Tabitha and her baby until he knew they were all right. When Doc Parker finally emerged, his expression was serious but not grim. "Mother and child are remarkably well, considering the circumstances," he reported. "The baby is small but breathing fine. Mrs. King is exhausted and somewhat dehydrated, but nothing that rest and good care won't mend." He fixed Clayton with a stern look. "You did well, young man. Not many would know how to handle such a situation." "I just did what needed doing," Clayton said, uncomfortable with the praise. "Can I see her, briefly? She needs rest." Doc Parker hesitated. Clayton, she told me about her husband and the men looking for her. This is serious business. I know. I'm going to see Sheriff Miller as soon as I know she's settled. The doctor nodded. I've told her she can stay here for a few days. My wife will help with the baby. Thank you, Doc, Clayton said with genuine gratitude. Tabitha was sitting up in bed when Clayton entered the examination room. She'd been given a clean nightgown, and her hair had been brushed and braided. Little Joseph slept in a makeshift cradle beside the bed. Doc says you're both doing well, Clayton said, standing somewhat awkwardly by the door. Thanks to you, Tabitha replied. He says you probably saved Joseph's life, a baby born that early alone in a cave. She shuddered. You did all the hard work, Clayton said with a small smile. I was just there to catch. A moment of silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with something neither was ready to name. I need to go see Sheriff Miller, Clayton said finally. Tell him about Blackwell and what happened to your husband. Will you be all right here? Doc Parker says his wife is a former midwife. We'll be in good hands. Tabitha hesitated, then reached out. Clayton, be careful. Blackwell seems to have friends everywhere. Clayton took her hand, surprised by how natural it felt. I'll be back before you know it. Try to rest. She nodded, and he reluctantly released her hand and left the room. Outside, he mounted Stormcloud and rode directly to the sheriff's office, his mind made up. Blackwell and his men would face justice, and somehow he would make sure Tabitha and her son were safe. Sheriff Miller was a tall man with iron-gray hair and a reputation for fairness that had earned him the respect of most law-abiding citizens in Alamosa County. He listened without interruption as Clayton related Tabitha's story and their encounter with Blackwell. I've been after those three for months, the sheriff said when Clayton finished, but without witnesses, my hands have been tied. He drummed his fingers on his desk. Mrs. King's testimony could put them away for good, but first, we need to make sure she stays alive to give it. Blackwell's looking for her, Clayton reminded him. If he finds out she's in town, he won't, Sheriff Miller said firmly. Not from me or my deputies. But Alamosa's a small place, Clayton. People talk. Clayton nodded grimly. What do you suggest? For now, she stays at Doc Parker's. Few places safer in town. I'll put a deputy on watch, someone I trust completely. The sheriff leaned forward. Meanwhile, I'll send telegrams to the marshals in Denver and Santa Fe. Blackwell's wanted for more than just this murder if my suspicions are correct. And me? Clayton asked. What can I do? Sheriff Miller studied him thoughtfully. You care about this woman and her child. It wasn't a question, but Clayton answered anyway. I do. They've been through hell, and Tabitha's the bravest person I've ever met. Then stay close, but don't make it obvious you're guarding her. I'll deputize you officially if need be. The sheriff stood. Go back to Doc's. I'll join you there after I send those telegrams and brief Deputy Collins on watch duty. Clayton returned to find Tabitha sleeping peacefully, her son in the arms of Mrs. Parker, a plump, cheerful woman who shooed him into the kitchen for a hot meal. He ate gratefully, suddenly aware of how little he'd consumed in the past 24 hours. That poor dear, Mrs. Parker said, pouring him coffee. To lose her husband and then have to flee, all while carrying a child, it's a miracle they both survived. She's stronger than she looks, Clayton said. Mrs. Parker gave him a knowing smile. Most women are, Mr. Young, most women are. Clayton spent the night on a cot in Doc Parker's study, too restless to sleep deeply. He kept thinking of Tabitha, of the trust she'd placed in him, of the weight of her in his arms as they rode to Alamosa. He'd known her barely a day, yet he felt responsible for her in a way that went beyond simple duty. Morning brought Sheriff Miller back, his expression grim. Blackwell and his men rode into town an hour ago, he reported. "They're at the saloon now, asking questions." It won't be long before someone mentions Doc Parker has a new patient. Clayton's hand went to his gun. "Let them come. We'll be ready." The sheriff shook his head. "No shootouts, Clayton. I want these men to face the judge, not go down in a blaze of bullets. Besides, Mrs. King and her baby could get caught in the crossfire. What's the alternative? We can't just wait for them to find her." "We don't wait," Sheriff Miller said firmly. "There's a stage leaving for Denver at noon. I want Mrs. King on it with you as escort. I've already arranged passage and wired ahead to the marshal there. You'll stay in Denver until the circuit judge arrives next week." Clayton nodded slowly. "I'll tell her." Tabitha took the news with remarkable composure. She was sitting up in bed, nursing Joseph while Mrs. Parker bustled around the room preparing a traveling bag. "Denver," she repeated. "What about my sister in Santa Fe?" "Once Blackwell and his men are in custody, you can go wherever you wish," Clayton assured her. "But for now, Denver is safer. The marshal there can provide better protection than we can here." Tabitha studied his face. "And you'll come with us." "All the way," Clayton promised. "Sheriff's orders." A small smile curved her lips. "Just following orders, then." Clayton found himself returning her smile. "Well, maybe I have a personal interest in seeing this through as well." The journey to the stagecoach office was tense. Clayton had borrowed civilian clothes from Doc Parker to be less conspicuous, and Tabitha wore a borrowed dress and shawl with the baby concealed beneath it. Sheriff Miller had arranged for them to board the stage at the last possible moment to minimize their exposure. They were nearly at the stage when Clayton spotted Doyle emerging from the general store. He quickly steered Tabitha into the alley between the telegraph office and the barber shop. "One of Blackwell's men," he whispered in explanation. "We'll go around back." Tabitha's face had gone pale, but she nodded resolutely, clutching Joseph closer to her chest. They crept through the alley and approached the stagecoach from the opposite direction. The driver was already on his seat, and the other passengers, a middle-aged couple and a traveling salesman, were settled inside. Sheriff Miller appeared suddenly at Clayton's elbow. "Hurry," he urged. "Blackwell just left the saloon." Clayton helped Tabitha into the coach, then turned to the sheriff. "If anything happens, it won't," Sheriff Miller said firmly. "Get to Denver, give your statements to Marshal Hayes, and stay put until I wire you that it's safe to return." Clayton nodded and climbed into the coach, settling beside Tabitha. The other passengers regarded them curiously, but said nothing as the sheriff closed the door and signaled to the driver. With a crack of the whip, the stage lurched forward. Through the small window, Clayton caught a glimpse of Blackwell running into the street, his face contorted with rage as he spotted the departing stagecoach. Their eyes met briefly before the stage rounded a corner and a limosa fell behind them. "He saw us," Tabitha whispered, her hand finding Clayton's. "Let him," Clayton replied, squeezing her fingers reassuringly. "He can't catch a stagecoach on horseback, not with the head start we've got." The journey to Denver would take 3 days, with stops at coaching inns along the way. The first day passed uneventfully, though Tabitha was clearly exhausted by the constant motion of the stagecoach. Little Joseph, remarkably, seemed to adapt well, sleeping through much of the journey and waking only to nurse. Their fellow passengers, the Hendersons, were a kindly couple from Boston who had been visiting their son in Santa Fe. They were immediately taken with Tabitha and her baby. "Such a precious little one," Mrs. Henderson cooed. "How old is he?" "Just 2 days," Tabitha replied, eliciting gasps of surprise. "My dear, you should be in bed, not jolting around in a stagecoach," Mrs. Henderson exclaimed. Clayton intervened smoothly. "Family emergency in Denver. Her sister is ill." The explanation satisfied the Hendersons, and they spent the rest of the afternoon regaling Tabitha with stories of their own children and grandchildren. Clayton was grateful for the distraction it provided her from the constant fear of pursuit. By nightfall, they reached the first coaching inn, a sturdy two-story building nestled in a small valley. Clayton helped Tabitha down from the coach, supporting her weight as her legs threatened to buckle. "Just a little further," he encouraged. "A real bed tonight." The inn had only 3 available rooms. The Hendersons took one, the traveling salesman another, leaving Clayton and Tabitha to share the third. Clayton immediately offered to sleep on the floor. "Don't be ridiculous," Tabitha said as she settled on the bed with Joseph. "After sleeping in a cave and then Doc Parker's spare room, I'm not about to deny you half of a perfectly good bed when you've done nothing but help us." Clayton hesitated. "It's not proper." "Proper went out the window when you delivered my baby in a cave," Tabitha pointed out with a tired smile. "Besides, I'll feel safer with you clothes." That settled the matter. Clayton arranged himself on the far side of the bed, still fully clothed except for his boots, maintaining a respectful distance between them. Tabitha curled on her side with Joseph nestled in the crook of her arm, and soon her even breathing told Clayton she was asleep. He lay awake much longer, listening to the night sounds of the inn and the soft breathing of the woman and child beside him. Strange how in just 2 days they had become so important to him. He had been alone for so long, keeping his distance from people after his troubled past. Yet somehow Tabitha had slipped past his defenses without even trying. Morning came too soon, with the stagecoach driver pounding on doors to rouse his passengers. Clayton woke to find Tabitha already up, changing Joseph's makeshift diaper with practiced hands despite her inexperience as a mother. "You're a natural," he commented, sitting up. She looked over her shoulder with a smile. "Hardly, but he's patient with me, thank goodness." She finished wrapping the baby and picked him up. "I was thinking last night about what happens after the trial. I can't go back to our homestead alone. What about your sister in Santa Fe?" Tabitha sighed. "Emily's husband is a banker with a house full of children already. They'd take us in, but—" She hesitated. "I don't want to be dependent. Joseph and I came west to build something of our own." Clayton watched her, admiring the determination in her green eyes despite all she'd endured. "You still could. Not alone, perhaps, but there are good people in Alamosa who'd help a widow get established." "Are you one of those good people, Clayton Young?" she asked softly. Before he could answer, a commotion erupted downstairs, shouting, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Clayton was on his feet instantly, gun drawn. "Stay here," he ordered. "Lock the door behind me." He slipped into the hallway, closing the door firmly. The sounds of a struggle grew louder as he descended the stairs. In the inn's common room, he found the stagecoach driver wrestling with a stranger in a dusty buckskin jacket. "What's going on?" Clayton demanded. The driver looked up, his face red with exertion. This skunk was asking about the passengers, specifically a woman with a baby. Clayton's blood ran cold. He leveled his gun at the stranger. "Who sent you?" The man spat on the floor. "Nobody sent me. Heard there might be a reward for information on a runaway wife. Red-haired fella in Alamosa is offering good money." "Blackwell," Clayton muttered. He glanced at the innkeeper. "Is there another way out of here?" "Backstairs, service door," the innkeeper nodded. "Through the kitchen, there's a door leads to the stable yard." "Get the stage ready," Clayton told the driver. "We're leaving now." To the stranger, he added, "You're staying here until we're long gone. Move an inch before then and I'll make sure you regret it." He backed toward the stairs, keeping his gun trained on the man. Once out of sight, he raced back to the room where Tabitha waited anxiously. "We need to go," he said tersely. "Blackwell's got people looking for us." He helped her gather their few belongings while she wrapped Joseph securely against her chest. "How did they find us so quickly?" she asked as they hurried down the back stairs. "Money talks," Clayton replied grimly, "and Blackwell seems to have plenty of it." They reached the kitchen, where the innkeeper's wife directed them to the back door. Outside, the stage was already hitched and waiting, the driver holding the nervous horses steady. "The Hendersons?" Clayton asked. "Already aboard," the driver replied. "The drummer, too. Let's get moving before more trouble shows up." They climbed in quickly. "Mrs. Henderson immediately made room for Tabitha, clucking sympathetically over the baby. "Such a dreadful business," she said. "The innkeeper told us someone was asking about you. Is it the baby's father? A family dispute?" "Something like that," Tabitha replied evasively. "Thank you for your understanding." The stage lurched forward, moving much faster than the previous day's sedate pace. Clayton kept his gun close, scanning the passing landscape for any sign of pursuit. By midday, they had left the coaching road for a less traveled trail that the driver assured them would still lead to Denver, though by a more circuitous route. "Better safe than sorry," he told Clayton during a brief stop to rest the horses. "I've seen what happens when Blackwell's boys catch up to someone they are after. Ain't pretty." The rougher trail meant slower going and a more uncomfortable ride. Tabitha bore it stoically, though Clayton could see the toll it was taking on her still recovering body. When they stopped for the night at a small trading post instead of the scheduled inn, he insisted on finding her the most comfortable spot available, a small back room normally used for storage. "Not exactly the Palmer house," he apologized as he cleared crates away to make space for their bedrolls. "It's perfect," Tabitha assured him. "And safer than a public inn, I imagine." They ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread provided by the trader's wife, who also cooed over Joseph and offered Tabitha advice on infant care. Clayton sat slightly apart, deep in thought about their next move. If Blackwell had people watching the roads, the final approach to Denver could be dangerous. "You're worried," Tabitha said quietly when they were alone again, preparing for sleep. Clayton nodded. "Blackwell's reach is longer than I expected. We need to be extremely careful from here on." "I trust you," Tabitha said simply. "You haven't steered us wrong yet." Her faith in him was both touching and terrifying. Clayton had spent years avoiding responsibility for others, focusing solely on rebuilding his own life after his misspent youth. Now, suddenly, this woman and her child were depending on him completely. "I won't let you down," he promised, and meant it more deeply than any vow he'd ever made. That night, as they lay side by side on their bedrolls, Tabitha broke the comfortable silence. "Tell me about your life before Alamosa. You mentioned Kansas." Clayton was quiet so long that Tabitha thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he sighed. "I was young and stupid. My parents died when I was 16, left me the farm and all the work that came with it. I wasn't ready. Fell in with some boys who seemed to have an easier way of making money." "Outlaws?" Tabitha asked softly. "Not at first. Just wild boys playing at being men, but it escalated, cattle rustling, then a stagecoach robbery." His voice grew tight. "Nobody was supposed to get hurt, but things went wrong. A passenger was shot." Tabitha reached out in the darkness, finding his hand. "What happened?" "He lived, thank God. I turned myself in, testified against the others. Judge took pity on me because of my age and my cooperation. Gave me 6 months in jail instead of years." Clayton's fingers tightened around hers. "When I got out, I knew I needed a fresh start. Headed west, worked honest jobs, kept my head down. Sheriff Miller in Alamosa was the first person who gave me a real chance, knowing my past." "People can change," Tabitha murmured. Joseph believed that strongly. It's why he befriended minors that others avoided, gave work to men with troubled histories. Your husband sounds like he was a remarkable man. He was. Tabitha was quiet for a moment. I loved him very much. But he would want me to go on, to be strong for our son. She hesitated. To be happy again someday. Clayton turned to look at her profile in the dim light. You will be, I promise. The final day of their journey dawned clear and crisp. The trader had sent word ahead with another traveler about their delayed arrival and alternate route. So with luck, Marshal Hayes would still be expecting them. They set out at first light, the driver pushing the horses as much as he dared on the rough trail. By noon, they could see Denver sprawled across the plain ahead, a bustling young city that had grown rapidly since the silver boom. Almost there, Clayton said encouragingly as Tabitha nursed Joseph. The Hendersons were dozing across from them, while the drummer had his nose buried in a catalog of his wares. As they approached the outskirts of the city, Clayton tensed. "Driver, slow down a bit," he called up. "Something wrong?" The driver called back. "Just being cautious." "There's riders up ahead." 3 horsemen were positioned where the trail joined the main road into Denver. Even at a distance, Clayton recognized the set of Blackwell's shoulders and the distinctive dappled horse Doyle rode. "It's them," he told Tabitha tersely. "They must have ridden straight through, changing horses at stations ahead of us." Tabitha clutched Joseph tighter. "What do we do?" Clayton thought quickly. "Driver," he called. "Can we cut across country here, circle around to the south?" The driver looked dubious. "It's rough going, but these horses could manage it." "Do it," Clayton ordered. "Now, before they spot us." The stage veered sharply off the trail, jolting across the uneven prairie. The Hendersons woke with startled exclamations, and the drummer clutched his samples case protectively. "What on earth?" Mr. Henderson began. "Sorry for the rough ride," Clayton said. "There's trouble ahead, men who mean harm to Mrs. King and her baby." Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened, but she nodded firmly. "Then by all means, let's avoid them." She reached over to steady Tabitha as the coach lurched over a particularly deep rut. Blackwell and his men had spotted them. Clayton could see them wheeling their horses around and spurring after the stage coach. "They're following," he shouted to the driver. "How much farther to the south road?" "Half a mile, maybe less," came the reply. "These horses can't keep this pace long on this terrain." Clayton made a decision. "Get Mrs. King to the marshal's office," he told the Hendersons. "Tell them Clayton Young sent you, that Blackwell's men are in pursuit." He checked his gun. "I'll slow them down." "Clayton, no," Tabitha protested. "They'll kill you. They have to catch me first," he replied with a grim smile. He leaned over and in a moment of impulse pressed a quick kiss to her forehead. "Take care of your boy. I'll see you in Denver." Before she could argue further, he flung open the door of the moving stagecoach and jumped, rolling as he hit the ground. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he ignored it, coming up with his gun drawn. Blackwell and his men were closing fast. Clayton took position behind a large boulder, steadying his aim. He didn't want to kill if he could avoid it. These men needed to stand trial for Joseph King's murder, but he wouldn't hesitate to defend himself. His first shot kicked up dirt in front of Blackwell's horse, causing the animal to rear in alarm. His second clipped Doyle's hat, sending it flying. The third rider wisely reined in, taking cover behind his mount. "That's far enough, Blackwell," Clayton shouted. "The law knows what you did to Joseph King. There's a federal marshal waiting in Denver." Blackwell's laugh carried across the distance between them. "You think I'm worried about some marshal? There's 3 of us and one of you young. And once you're out of the way, that woman's as good as silenced." "Not today," Clayton muttered, taking careful aim again. This time his bullet found Doyle's shoulder, sending the man tumbling from his saddle with a howl of pain. Blackwell and the third man opened fire, forcing Clayton to duck behind his boulder. Bullets whined off the rock, sending chips flying. He waited for a pause in the shooting, then risked a quick glance. Blackwell was advancing on foot, using the uneven ground for cover, while his remaining companion provided suppressing fire. Clayton waited, controlling his breathing as Sheriff Miller had taught him. When Blackwell moved between patches of cover, Clayton fired twice in rapid succession. The first shot missed, but the second caught Blackwell in the leg. The outlaw went down with a bellow of rage and pain. The third man hesitated, clearly reconsidering his options with both his companions wounded. Clayton seized the moment. "Drop your gun and raise your hands," he commanded. "Your friends need medical attention and you're not getting past me." For a tense moment, Clayton thought the man would continue fighting. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon and raised his hands. "Wise decision," Clayton said, keeping his gun trained on the man as he emerged from behind the boulder. "Now tell Blackwell to drop his weapon too." "Do what he says, Wade," Blackwell growled, his face contorted with pain as he clutched his bleeding leg. "This ain't over, Young." "Not by a long shot." "It's over enough for now," Clayton replied. He kept his distance, covering all three men carefully as he collected their weapons. "The stagecoach will have reached the South Road by now. Help will be coming." As if on cue, the sound of galloping horses approached from the direction of Denver. A group of riders appeared, led by a tall man with a silver marshal's badge gleaming on his chest. "Marshal Hayes," Clayton called out. "I'm Clayton Young. Sheriff Miller from Alamosa wired you about us." The marshal dismounted, eyeing the three wounded outlaws. "Got your message from the stage driver when they reached town. Mrs. King and the baby are safe at my office." He nodded approvingly. "Nice work, Young. We've been wanting to have a conversation with Mr. Blackwell here for some time." Within the hour, Blackwell and his men had been disarmed, their wounds treated, and all three securely locked in the Denver jail. Clayton, nursing a bruised shoulder from his leap from the stagecoach, was reunited with Tabitha at the marshal's office. She flew into his arms the moment he walked through the door, heedless of propriety or the curious eyes of the marshal's deputies. "You reckless fool," she scolded, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I thought they'd killed you." Clayton held her carefully, mindful of Joseph sleeping in a makeshift cradle nearby. "Takes more than Blackwell and his boys to do that," he assured her, though in truth it had been a near thing. Marshal Hayes cleared his throat. "Mrs. King has given us her statement about her husband's murder. With your testimony about Blackwell's pursuit and today's events, I'd say those men are looking at a hanging." "Good," Clayton said firmly. "Joseph King deserves justice, and his widow deserves peace," Marshal Hayes added. He hesitated, then continued. "Mrs. King mentioned you might be planning to return to Alamosa after the trial." Tabitha looked up at Clayton. "We haven't really discussed it," she admitted. "Everything happened so fast." "Well, if you're considering options," the marshal said, "my sister runs a boarding house here in Denver. Clean, respectable place with reasonable rates, and Denver's growing fast, plenty of opportunity for those willing to work hard." "Thank you, Marshal," Tabitha said. "We'll certainly consider it." When they were alone again, settled in the comfortable back room the marshal had provided for them, Clayton finally asked the question that had been on his mind since that morning. "What do you want to do, Tabitha? After the trial, I mean." She looked down at Joseph, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I'm not sure. Santa Fe with my sister still seems the safest option for Joseph." "And for you," Clayton pressed gently. Tabitha met his eyes. "I want what I came west for in the first place, a home of my own." A place where Joseph can grow up free and strong. She took a deep breath. I'd like that place to be near someone he can look up to, someone who's shown courage and kindness when we needed it most. Clayton's heart pounded. Tabitha, are you saying? I'm saying I care for you, Clayton Young, she interrupted. More than I thought possible after losing Joseph. It's fast and probably foolish, but these past days have shown me what kind of man you are. Clayton took her free hand, cradling it between both of his. Nothing about you could ever be foolish. You're the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. He hesitated. I care for you too, more than I can say, but I won't rush you. You've been through too much. Life is uncertain, Tabitha said softly. I learned that when I lost my husband. I don't want to waste time being cautious when my heart is sure. Clayton leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, he kissed her gently, a promise and a beginning wrapped in one. In the days that followed, as they waited for the circuit judge to arrive, Clayton and Tabitha explored Denver together. He carried Joseph proudly, already feeling a connection to the boy that went beyond his role in the child's birth. They visited the Marshall's sister's boarding house and found it as clean and welcoming as promised. We could stay here for a while, Tabitha suggested as they walked back toward the Marshall's office. Until we decide what's next, Clayton nodded. I've been thinking about that. Sheriff Miller mentioned once that he might have a position for a full-time deputy. With Blackwell behind bars, Alamosa will be safer. You'd want to go back? Tabitha asked, surprised. Only if you were willing, Clayton assured her. Your homestead is still legally yours. With help, you could make it work. He hesitated. We could make it work together. The circuit judge arrived the following week. The trial was brief but thorough, with Tabitha's testimony about her husband's murder serving as the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Clayton's account of Blackwell's pursuit and the confrontation outside Denver provided further damning evidence. The verdict was never in doubt. Blackwell and his men were found guilty of murder and attempted murder. The judge sentenced them to hang, though Doyle's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in recognition of his lesser role and eventual cooperation. As they left the courthouse after the sentencing, Tabitha took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. It's over, she said, wonder in her voice. Joseph can rest in peace now. And you can begin again, Clayton said, squeezing her hand. Have you thought about my suggestion about Alamosa? Tabitha nodded. I have, and I think I'd like to try. The homestead was our dream, Joseph's and mine. It would honor his memory to make it work. She looked up at Clayton. But I don't want to do it alone. You won't have to, Clayton promised. Not if you'll have me at your side. 2 weeks later, they returned to Alamosa on the stagecoach, little Joseph thriving despite his early arrival. Sheriff Miller met them at the stage station, his weathered face breaking into a broad smile. Welcome back, he said, shaking Clayton's hand firmly. And congratulations on becoming a family. Mrs. Parker told me the news. Tabitha blushed. She and Clayton had been married by a minister in Denver 3 days earlier, a simple ceremony with Marshall Hayes and his sister as witnesses. It had been sudden, perhaps, but felt right to both of them. Thank you, Sheriff, she said. I understand you might have a position for my husband. Indeed I do, Mrs. Young, Sheriff Miller replied with a twinkle in his eye. Alamosa's growing, and I need a deputy I can trust. He turned serious. I also wanted you to know we found the deed to your homestead in Blackwell's office. Seems he was planning to forge your signature once you were. No longer a problem. Is the place still standing? Clayton asked. Needs work, but the structure's sound, the sheriff assured them. And the water rights are secure now, railroads paying fair prices for access. As they walked through Alamosa toward the hotel where they would stay until the homestead was ready, Tabitha looked around at the bustling little town that would be their home. Mrs. Wilson waved from the boarding house steps. Doc and Mrs. Parker called greetings from their buggy. Even the saloon owner tipped his hat respectfully. "They remember what Joseph and I were trying to build," Tabitha said softly. "They care." "That's Alamosa," Clayton replied, his arm around her shoulders. "Rough around the edges but good at heart." That evening, as they settled into their hotel room with Joseph sleeping nearby, Tabitha stood by the window, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the sunset sky. "I was so afraid when I fled into those hills," she said quietly. "So certain that Joseph and I would die there, alone and forgotten." Clayton came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "Instead, you found your way to a new beginning." She turned in his arms to face him. "We both did." She traced his jawline with gentle fingers. "I never expected to find love again so soon, to feel this way." "Some things can't be planned," Clayton said, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Some things are just meant to be. Like a cowboy hearing a woman's cries in a remote cave," Tabitha asked with a smile. "Exactly like that," Clayton agreed, drawing her closer. "The best kind of accident." 1 year later, the King Young homestead was thriving. The small cabin had been expanded to a proper house, with a large kitchen where Tabitha experimented with recipes from her mother's collection. A barn housed 4 fine horses, the beginning of the breeding operation Joseph had dreamed of, and that Clayton was now bringing to fruition. Little Joseph was walking now, tottering after the chickens in the yard while his parents watched from the porch. Clayton still worked as Sheriff Miller's deputy 3 days a week, but the rest of his time was devoted to the homestead and his family. "I have news," Tabitha said one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold. She took Clayton's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Joseph will have a brother or sister by spring." Clayton's face lit with joy as he gathered her into his arms. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," Tabitha replied. "My cowboy, my rescuer, my heart." Inside the house, little Joseph called out for them, his voice clear and strong. As they rose to go to him, Tabitha paused to look out once more at the land that had brought them together, the wilderness that had nearly claimed her life, but had instead given her a new one. "Thank you," she whispered to the distant hills where a cave had sheltered her in her darkest hour. Then she turned and followed Clayton inside, toward the warmth and light of the home they had built together.